It begins with silence, thick, motionless, almost holy silence that hangs over the black waters of San Francisco Bay like a heavy curtain just before a play begins.
Alcatraz Island, lit faintly by a crescent moon and the flickering amber of the mainland's glow, doesn't move. It doesn't breathe. It just looms. Cold, unforgiving, unescapable.
Or so they said. June 11th, 1962, 3:42 a.m. Somewhere beneath the crumbling surface of cell block B, inside a damp concrete cell barely wider than a coffin, something was stirring. Not a man, not yet, just the sound of slow scraping. Metal against plaster, cautious and patient like a surgeon's blade. A handmade drill, constructed from a broken vacuum cleaner motor and stolen spoons, was chewing into a vent behind a steel sink.
The hands guiding it belonged to Frank Morris. Morris had been born into abandonment, shuffled through foster homes, juvenile halls, and penitentiaries like an unwanted package.
But he had something most inmates didn't. A mind like a lockpick. Cold, analytical, always turning. They called him the Head in Atlanta because of his IQ, 133. He barely spoke, but when he did, people listened.
Next to him, in neighboring cells, were the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. Florida boys, bank robbers, tough as nails.
Almost indistinguishable in their blonde curls and steady stares. Where Frank was the brain, the Anglins were the muscle. Together, they were building something that didn't belong in a prison. A dream, but this wasn't some fantasy whispered in the yard or passed in coded messages during lunch. This was real, and it was happening now. Under the roar of nightly cell checks, the screech of foghorns, and the shuffle of guards, 3 men had replaced the grates behind their sinks with false walls made of cardboard and paint. They'd spent months hollowing out a secret corridor behind their cells, a forgotten utility passage filled with ancient pipes and shadows no guard had seen in decades. And then there were the dummies. Heads made from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair smuggled from the barber shop. Each one rested quietly on their pillows, positioned just right to fool the guards into believing the prisoners slept soundly. They weren't sleeping. Beneath the cell block, the air was thick with mildew and rust. Every step forward was a gamble. If they made noise, if a pipe burst, if a single guard turned his head at the wrong moment, it would be over. But they had planned for every variable, every screw in the wall, every second on the clock. For 7 months they worked, in secret, in silence. Paddles carved from plywood, stolen from the prison workshop. It wasn't just clever, it was brilliant and suicidal. Because even if they made it out of the prison, the San Francisco Bay awaited, frigid, brutal, and utterly merciless. The currents alone could pull a grown man under in seconds. The water temperature, 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia could set in within minutes. No one had ever escaped Alcatraz. Not alive. But at 10:30 p.m. on June 11, 1962, they began. The vent grates were quietly removed, the dummies positioned. The escapees crawled through the tunnels behind their cells like rats in a machine. Past rusted metal and ancient wires, they reached the top of the utility corridor, an unguarded blind spot between the cell house roof and the outside world.
There, in the gloom, was the vent that led to the roof. They had loosened it weeks earlier.
One final push, and they were on top of the prison. Below them, the guards walked their rounds. Above them, nothing but a thin veil of night. At 11:30 p.m., they descended the roof using a drain pipe, sprinted across the rear service yard, and scaled two 12-foot perimeter fences. The second was laced with barbed wire, and Clarence sliced open his palm during the climb, but he didn't stop. Behind a workshop building, at the island's edge, they inflated the raft using a stolen concertina, a type of accordion. The hissing air echoed against the concrete. Frank checked the seals. The Anglins packed the makeshift paddles. By 12:05 a.m., the raft was ready, and then they were gone. The next morning, 7:15 a.m., guard William Long made his rounds. He walked past cell 138, cell 139, cell 140. At first, everything looked normal. The prisoners were sleeping, faces turned to the wall. But something was off. The heads didn't stir, the blankets didn't move. Long approached, called out. No response. He reached for the bars, tapped one of the heads. It rolled onto the floor, made of papier-mâché. Alarms screamed across the island. Searchlights lit up the bay. Helicopters beat the air into a frenzy. Coast Guard boats crisscrossed the water for days. Planes scanned the currents. Divers plunged beneath the surface. Nothing. No bodies, no raft, no paddles. Just a single paddle, a wallet wrapped in plastic, and a few personal photos floating near Angel Island. Found a day later, the FBI launched a massive manhunt. Files were opened, witnesses interviewed. For 17 years, the case remained active until it was officially closed in 1979 with a single, unsatisfying conclusion. The men had most likely drowned. But the world wasn't so sure. Over the decades, sightings poured in. A man in Brazil claimed to have met the Anglins. A letter dated 2013 and sent to the San Francisco Police Department surfaced, allegedly written by Frank Morris himself. It read, "Yes, we all made it that night. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer." It was signed simply, Frank. The handwriting matched, but the FBI dismissed it. No DNA, no fingerprints, no conclusive evidence. Just smoke, shadows, hints. In 2015, a photograph emerged. Two elderly men standing side by side on a Brazilian farm. One was said to be Clarence Anglin, the other John. The photo had allegedly been taken in 1975, 13 years after the escape. Facial recognition experts said it was a match. Still, the government said no. The case remains open. But deep inside the walls of Alcatraz, now a tourist site with audio guides and souvenir mugs, the cell doors still rattle. The escape route still exists, sealed off, but visible. The dummy heads sit under glass, smiling their silent, haunting grin. And the bay, still cold, still brutal, holds its secrets tight. Was it a brilliant con pulled off with nothing but spoons and silence? Or the final act of three desperate men swallowed by the sea? We may never know. But on nights when the fog drapes the city and the water laps quietly at the shore, Some still say they hear the faint sound of paddles cutting through the tide, and the whisper of a name that still defies the impossible. Alcatraz, the rock that was never meant to break. But maybe, just once, it did.